This demonstration is on glaze mapping and glazing. Glaze mapping is important because our glaze does not always look the same in the jar as it does in a fired sample. How will you know what your fired glaze looks like? In the back of the room where we keep our glazes, there's many glaze samples. This is exactly what's in the jar above it, as long as it's been replaced in the right place. You can check on the back to make sure that this matches the jar. See how this says Indian Summer on both the jar and the glaze sample. Okay. When I open the jar, I see that the color looks similar but not the same. Okay. This is much more dull gray rose compared to this bright color. In some cases, the glazes on the shelf might look like a rust color in the container and then come out like a yellow. Okay, that's because in the firing, just like the bisque firing, in the glaze firing, there's a chemical reaction that happens. If you have iron oxide, for instance, red iron oxide is red or rust looking. You put some rutile in with it, and after the firing, it kicks over to a yellow, like in a glaze that we have that's called wheat field. Glaze maps are important because it allows us to choose our colors and to remember. It can be our memory to remember what color we used. For instance, this color you would never guess is called emerald green.
Is it green?
When it's fired, it looks like emerald green. It's on the back wall. And I'm remembering from my glaze map because I wrote down my colors, what colors I used. Here, it looks white. When it fires, it's going to look different. Okay? So, your glaze samples and your glazes and their proximity to each other on the shelf is important. Please make sure when you're glazing that you put the right color glaze over the right sample. What happens every semester to at least one student is they don't check the back of their glaze sample to make sure that they're grabbing the right jar, and they will just grab the jar off the shelf and they'll end up grabbing the wrong color. And it's sad when it happens, but sometimes they come up with something they end up getting, they don't find out until it's fired, it comes out of the kiln looking totally different than what they had pre-planned on their map. Okay? So what you would want to do is write all the information. Say, on this tile there's 3 different leaves, and I want to make them different, so I'm not going to just put green, dark green, light green. I'm going to put the specific name of the glazes that I'm going to use. Notice this tile is not bright white like your tile. There's something that you can use called underglaze that you apply, this isn't hard to remember, under the glaze. It shows off texture if you're going to use any translucent glaze. Now, if you put underglaze on your tile, which is basically colored clay, and then put an opaque glaze on top, you're going to cover up all of your work. You'll cover up the underglaze. You have to put a translucent tile. Like this is actually a translucent color. Okay? The yellow, which I don't have in front of me, is an opaque color. I just know from memory. Jay, can you get from the top shelf the yellow glaze sample? And I'll show you. So, if you have difficulty knowing if you're picking a translucent or opaque glaze, please feel free to ask me. It kind of takes a trained eye to figure that out, but I'd be happy to help you with it. That's why I'm here. This glaze is an opaque glaze. It has the addition of alumina in it. These are different colorants. Look at how the alumina fills the delicate texture. Here with a translucent glaze, I can see the white clay right through. It almost pastels out the color. Then I know that it's translucent. So I know that if I choose to use underglaze, it's going to show through. You don't have to use underglaze. Some glazes have two different colors in them just out of one jar. They separate and the colors look different. For instance, these colors, rust and burnt sugar, look like they're two different glazes that are layered. They're not. They're just one glaze. Okay? Where the glaze is thick in the incised areas, it shows yellow. Where it's thin, it shows brown. Okay? Here, where it's thin, and you know, I don't think there's a thick-thin difference. I don't see a huge thick-thin difference, but it settles out differently. And this is the rust. So this isn't two glazes layered on each other.
How do you blend it, like blend two glazes? Would you want to fade something?
If you wanted to have two glazes, there's the short jars in the back of the room. These jars can be layered. However, they can be layered and you can create like an ombre effect, like you'll see Amy Polero's small girl sculpture that she has in the jewelry case. Take a look when you get a chance at that sculpture. She has overlaid one glaze on another glaze in a small transitional area. Okay? You can layer those glazes, anything in a short spectrum jar. If it's not a spectrum glaze, don't layer it. You could take a red and a white and mix them or layer them and think you're going to get pink, but you won't get pink. We actually don't know what you would get because notice there's no ingredient list on these glazes. These are commercial glazes. In my studio, I mix my glazes, and so I know what's in them, and I can adjust the colors using my knowledge of glaze. But I don't know all the ingredients. I can guess, and I know what makes a glaze matte, the alumina, and what makes it shiny, the fritz, but I don't know all the ingredients in these glazes. So you can layer these short, they advertise these glazes as glazes that can be layered. There's an example on the back table, Nachikat's example of two wildly different colors layered on top of each other. Okay. Is it back there? It's like a red and a green layered on top. We know what happens normally when we mix paint that's red and green. What do we get? When we mix red and green paint, what do we get? Like a gray, right? Right? We get a neutral. In glaze, that's not going to happen. We'll literally see one color on top of another. So it's a little different. Okay? So you can layer these underglazes. How do you apply it? If you want to use an underglaze and then put a transparent on top, here's a sculpture that Jake Walter gave me of a little owl that he made in ceramics class. Love it. Take this. This is underglaze. You can use any brush to apply underglaze, and underglaze can be applied at any consistency. You can just brush it on. wait until you see how different this looks when I wipe away the underglaze. I'm going to apply it and then wipe it off to show off the texture. And then you would want to go to the sink because this sponge is pretty dry. And so you'd want to go to the sink and probably grab a smaller sponge. And you want to clean your sponge regularly. Now, you might want to get even in between a little bit more. You could get like a stiff bristle brush. Wipe it off so you can show some of the texture. Anything that's raised, is still going to be bright white. Then you can choose a glaze that you know is going to be translucent, such as this. Shake it. Then, watch what I do. Take up the lid. Okay. We have sticks in the back of the room. You're going to want to mix your glaze with a stick, or in this case, this looks like a perfect mix here. So I'm just going to use the handle of my brush. You kind of know how much pressure the handle of your brush can handle. And I can hear the bottom of the plastic container, so I know that there's no frit at the bottom of my plastic container. What happens with glaze is glaze settles out in the matter of an hour, okay? And if you don't mix it consistently, then the glass or the part that makes your glaze shiny will settle to the bottom, and your piece will come out of the kiln chalky looking, which might not be what you're looking for. It definitely would look different than this, okay? And then reach to the bottom, and then watch how I apply the glaze. You're probably going to be surprised. Up. Thank you.
Move it down.
There we go.
Definitely not a movie star, right? I get fired from the Food Network for this, definitely. Okay. Oh, fired! Okay. So, your question might be, Miss West, you had the color difference with the underglaze, now it's gone. Is it going to still show when I take it out of the kiln? Yes, because remember, go back to your fired example. It won't show, your underglaze work won't show before it goes in the kiln, but it will make a big difference when it comes out. Are you required to use underglaze or colored clay? No. It's just one way to make your texture really stand out. The other way would be to choose a glaze that's multi-surface. What I wouldn't do is choose an opaque single-colored glaze on something that's got a lot of texture because it's not showing off that texture at all.
Say that again?
What I would not do is choose a single opaque, just one opaque glaze, and cover all of your texture with it, because it won't show off the texture to the best of its ability, okay? What you could do is put this glaze down first, wipe the extra off, and then put a transparent, even a clear on top, and it looks awesome. You would do that in the same way. So in other words, although chemically different, an opaque glaze can be applied the same way as an underglaze to show off texture. How about eyes? Now, I'm looking at this brush and these little eyes, and do you think this brush is a good choice?
No.
It's too huge. Not good. This is a little better. If you get glaze dripping on an undesired area, like an area where you didn't want that glaze, let it dry and you can chip it off with a needle tool. It chips right off with a needle tool. Okay? Okay, now I've got some yellow on there, and I can put a transparent over it, or clear over it, in the black areas of the eye. I think I would use underglaze. If you didn't put like a hole for the iris, and you have an iris on your animal, or irises on your animal, and you didn't put a hole there, there isn't like a level difference, it's fine. Put underglaze on it. Finish glazing your tile. I'll fire it, and then we can put clear nail polish over the eye to make it shiny. It looks really good. You can actually tell the difference between clear nail polish and clear glaze. The clear glaze is in gallon buckets in the back of the room, and it's pink. Look in the back of the room next to the paper towel dispenser. See that pink gallon? Do you think the glaze is really pink?
No, I don't think so. I think it's clear.
It's food coloring. It's actually, without the food coloring, it's the same surface and color as your tile. There's food coloring in it, so we can see where it's applied. Otherwise, we wouldn't know. Okay? Once your glaze is dry, you put on a second coat. Okay? So you just go right back, and you can see the difference. See how this is beginning to dry? See where it's shiny and where the edges where it's dry? You glaze another area until it's totally matte, and then you can just put, just because of time, I'm not waiting, put a second coat on top. And you just mop the glaze on, okay? And then, like I said, any areas that you missed, like here, you just chip off. The biggest mistake that happens in glazing is two things. Here's my celadon and emerald green, and what you want to do that many students don't do is remember to butt the glaze, even if you overlap a little bit, right up against the other glaze. Feel free to overlap those glazes a little bit. It looks better than a white, chalky bisque line bordering all of your colors. Some students are afraid of mixing. It's better to have color against color. Another thing that happens is students glaze, and this happened to me. It's going to happen to you. The glaze runs down, and then just kind of makes a mess on your tile. That's okay. You can go over it with a needle tool. I'll use an X-Acto blade just because it's handy, and look at what happens. It literally chips right off. Blow on it, done, and then you can glaze the background of your tile. These eyes are fired black. They look great after the firing with nail polish on them. That's during the time that we are going to glaze chipped, where if you have a corner of your tile that came off, the area that's connecting the two tiles, do not put glaze. Leave that raw clay so that we can glue it together at that seam. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Okay, thank you for listening. Please, first step is glaze map and fill in, like, just write what you want to use for every single color on here, keeping in mind your texture and your surfaces. And then the second step is to glaze, which we will start on Thursday. Unless you're a lab student, then I'm going to ask you to come in tomorrow from the basement, get a pass to come in and do some glazing. Okay?
So, I guess pretty